Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Maybe I'm Just Not Getting It. I'm your podcast host, Robert Davis. Really appreciate you all for tuning in. Before we get started, let me just plug myself real quick. Follow me on Instagram. Um, the name RTD underscore III. Facebook, Robert Trey Davis III, and all episodes are on Spotify. I promise you I'm going to get them up to another platform soon. I'm not just saying that, I promise you I will. Um, so, with that being said, I'm going to jump into today's episode. This is kind of another rant, so I apologize if it seems kind of unorganized of me talking kind of just sporadically. But I call them soapbox rants, so I'm on my soapbox, like they would say. And today I kind of just wanted to talk about something that I feel like gets brought up in every, almost in like everyday situations, but it doesn't really get the full context of conversation like I think it deserves. And that's the concept of cultural appropriation. And so just to kind of start first, cultural appropriation, at least in a very layman's terms, is the concept of um, imitating or taking from one's culture with I'm gonna say, yeah, imitating or taking from one's culture without, I guess, properly acknowledging that culture. That's what at least the concept is said to be, or at least it's thought out in today's times. Is without properly acknowledging or respecting that culture that would seem to be the housing unit for it, that action or whatever. And it's important to talk when we talk about culture. It's not just racial. I mean, culture can be based upon your geographic location, your race, your nationality, your sexuality, your religion, your gender. Like I can, as a black man in North Carolina, my culture can be a lot different than a black man in San Francisco. A um, a Christian culture can be a lot different than Muslim. Um, you can be both, like I said, you can be just your country, your nationality. I mean, um, a Hispanic man from Mexico culture may be different than Hispanic man from Spain. Um, a black man's culture may be different from a black woman's to a degree. Somebody who grew up in a different time period in the 90s may have a different culture than somebody that grew up in the 70s. So it's important to know that when we talk about culture, we're talking about a very broad subject that everybody has access to. Everybody has a culture in a sense. And we're talking about, and when we talk about like the ideas that are in the sense of what's appropriated, we're talking about everything. Music, dress, dialects and slang, fashion, food, media, um, how we interact with one another, our faiths, like all of that are actions within specific cultures as well. And so it's I say that to say that it's important to note just the broadness that this conversation comes up on. We're not talking about one specific subset. We're talking about culture and the actions within a culture in a general sense, which can be almost anything. And it's important to know, as we were kind of just alluding to, that every culture and every part of society has their own uniqueness. They have their own specific things that make them who they are. And like we were saying, being in the South is its own culture compared to being in the Midwest, which is different compared to being raised in rural Russia, which is different compared to being raised in the United Arab Emirates. So, like, all of it's important to know that that everything has its own specificity to it, and that all of that has to be respected, as its own thing, as its own living, not as a living, but as its own tangible or intangible item of this particular culture's zeitgeist. I know I'm using a lot of big words, just bear with me. So I think it's important to know that also as an integrating as the world grows and integrates, and integration is the main key of any society, and integration is not a sense of one culture taking over another, but all being able to live in harmony with each other, being able to share and be unique in their own respects with, and all of that working in harmony, right? And so as the world steadily moves towards that, every day we're moving towards that because people are moving, they're sharing ideas, they're coming from one place to another, they're experiencing different things. So as it's inevitable that appropriation happens. And I think as people are influenced by various things, by various topics, various issues, that they will imitate that influence. They will and they'll leave things that they don't like, and they'll pick up things that they do like. And I just think that it's important for us to understand that that culture and cultures are various and broad as the day is long, and they all have specificities and specific things to them that make them unique. That we all can take from and learn from, but as well be respectful of and understanding of as well. And so we may say, well, why does that matter, right? I mean, like we are just saying, ideas and cultures don't spread without some sort of appropriation. And it's important in this context to talk about, I'm going to talk about appropriation both in a positive and a negative sense. But I think it's important to talk about first in a general sense that appropriation, by the concept of idea spreading, is a natural phenomenon that will happen, regardless of how much that one person or other people may not want it to. And so I think the question then becomes, well, how do you define what levels of variations of appropriation are okay and not okay? And I think that really is based upon the level of understanding and respect that one would have for that culture that they're taking from. And I don't think it's like, well, you have to understand everything about a culture to respect it, and you don't have to respect everything about a culture to understand it. But you do have to but you do have to have. I think respect is the biggest thing here. You do have to have a respect for a culture. You don't have to fully understand everything that goes on, but you should understand what you're appropriating to a degree. But you should respect it off bat. And I think that's where you can kind of get into that. Well, this is okay compared to this isn't. You know, I can say that my hair, for example, is a cultural, I mean, it is very much a cultural type of hairstyle. And I can also say that I don't think that a white guy wearing dreadlocks to me isn't disrespectful. If he doesn't respect the culture and he just did it, I would feel a little bit more offended by it than compared to somebody that does. But either way, I have to understand and respect the fact that I can't tell him not to do that just as much as I wouldn't want him to tell me not to wear my hair straight like Fred from Scooby Doo or something like that, you know? And so I think it's important to one understand, all right, what's okay and what's not okay. Um, what is appropriation compared to what is just taking from what you've experienced and taking things that you like in life, which you are completely allowed to do, you know? I think a lot of times we try to put each other in a box too much. This is how you should act when you don't have to do anything that anybody else tells you or that you should do. You can act however you want to. Um, and again, I think it just comes back to that whatever you're taking from, if you're working with that level of understanding and respect towards it, then you should be fine. And so I think it's two concepts here that I think keeps people, it's kind of like the yin and the yang when we talk about cultural appropriation. And just that sharing and spreading of ideas. I think the concept of gatekeeping is one, because gatekeeping is where one person, or where not one person, but where an idea, and the way that we talk about idea can be anything in the sense, is seemingly kind of guarded because the impression is that it shouldn't be shared with another group because of who that group is, or because they feel, or that that group that has that idea feels like it should only be for them. I don't particularly believe that gatekeeping is a positive thing. Like, I don't believe that if I'm gonna use dreadlocks a lot because it's right here and I think it's easy for people to understand. I don't think that black people could gatekeep, or even black people trying to gatekeep the idea of dreadlocks is a good thing. And we're not doing that. But I don't, just theoretically, if that was the case, I wouldn't think that was a good thing for the same reason for the hair example I just gave. Rap music, I wouldn't think that black people gatekeeping rap music was a good thing, because I wouldn't want white people to be like, well, you can't make country, you can't make pop, you can't make rock and roll, even though black people did make rock and roll and that was appropriated based off of that. Uh, um, and white people appropriated that sound. And I don't think that was completely a negative thing because it is a sharing of ideas and cultures. But it is. I mean, but that is the truth and the history behind it. And so I think gatekeeping to a degree comes from that fear that, oh, they're going to take this and they're going to make it their own and they're going to do all these things with it and we're not going to get any credit for it. And while I get that, while I get the fear of it, you can't keep an idea quiet because you can't tangibly control it, for one. For two, white people just quite frankly have always had the one up on every system in this world. So no matter what they do, they're always going to have the advantage on it. Like, I mean, that's just the case. That's why that's why, I'm not going to say black, I'm not going to make this completely racial. That's why rappers, and they say, or any musician, especially coming from an urban field, you don't make your real money until you gain your white audience. I mean, it's just the way that it is. Like, um, and on the flip side of the gatekeeping, I think is what causes the gatekeeping is that you get, some of it comes from some cultural appropriation comes from a level of mocking or disrespect or ignorance. I take a lot of this when I see people trying to imitate being hood, or being like a nerdy white guy, or I think a lot of racial stereotypes come across that as just strictly mocking, disrespectful, and I think that's where we come across people trying to be very much, um, what's the word I'm looking for? People trying to very. That's where the gatekeeping. I think that gatekeeping type of phenomenon comes in, and that people don't want their culture, where however that may be, to be mocked or disrespected. And I think, that's where we become very hesitant to share. But as long as people are able to communicate with each other and move freely with each other, then there is nothing that we can do to stop the spread of culture and ideas. And really, we shouldn't, quite frankly. But I think it's important that when we see these things of mocking and disrespect, when you see a white person dressed up in blackface and the big lips and all sort of stuff like that, it's important to understand that that person does not have a respect or understanding of the culture, and that's why it is perceived as disrespectful. While compared to, I'm gonna say just a white musician rapping, I don't. While that's a literal musical form that black people may have made famous, but white people can do as well, I don't consider that as much mocking or disrespect. But I do think to a degree the gatekeeping comes in where it's like, oh, they shouldn't be able to do that. And I'm like, well, why not? I mean, it's a free thing for them to do. If they want to rap or rhyme or poetry, shit, why not? So I think it's important to understand that gatekeeping versus the fear of that mocking and disrespectful type of concept, and why we choose to kind of hold on to things as strongly as we do. And so just to kind of run through some examples of it, just to kind of kind of bring some faces to the point to a degree. We see it, cultural appropriation a lot in music, right? And again, I'm talking about this more in a positive than a negative sense, but um, like Beyonce with the Cowboy Carter thing, you know, again, the concept of should a black woman be able to make a country album? Yes, by all means, she should be able to. Not because she's country, but because it's a free world and it's music, and anybody can make whatever music they want. Yes, like that. And to me, that's the base of the answer is yes. And so, to see her go from the R&B and pop stage to be able to make a world class country album, that isn't a example of cultural appropriation in a positive sense of being able to take a culture, one that she understands and respects through, the musical artists and the producers that she uses, and really be able to, and just the musical style itself really being a country album and not just being something where somebody's like I feel like for y'all that remember Lil Wayne's rock album, that was almost a disrespectful level of cultural appropriation because it was more a rapper making what they think is a rock album, where I don't think they really had a full respect or understanding of rock music. Well, the Cowboy Carter thing I think is different, where I think you had an artist that has a full understanding and respect of country music, trying to make a country album, you know. And so, I mean, on the flip side, we're coming back, and just to kind of veer off a little bit, the relationship between rap and country, and I say that because I was going to bring up Post Malone and Lil Nas X next, but they're all of those are a close example of the close relationship between rap and country music. How the topics, the themes, everything very heavily mirrors each other, and that's why a lot of times just the content and the messages are so in line. That's why Kid Rock used to be down with black people a lot back in the day, because hip hop used to fuck with Kid Rock a lot. Um, and so, again, Post Malone is he culturally appropriating black music by being a white guy that started in rap and kind of veered off in the country? No, I don't think so. One, because I mean, I don't think he made bad hip hop music for one, but for two, because he's free to do so. Same thing I said with Machine Gun Kelly. Like, he's free to do so. I don't think that you can tell somebody how to not express themselves in that sense, as long as they're not. I don't think rapping means you're disrespecting black people, because that was the case. Playing, what does that mean? Playing Jimi Hendrix playing the electric guitar or a regular guitar, for that acoustic guitar, would be disrespectful to white people? Like, no. So I just don't think it runs into that. Bruno Mars. I remember hearing people talk about, well, because I think he is. I forget where exactly. I want to say the Philippines, but I forget exactly where he's from. But I know he's not. I hate saying that like this. I know he's not black per se. And like, I know there were some people that were saying, "Oh, well, you have this guy and he's imitating black artists even though he's not black." But Bruno Mars grew up listening to R&B. He grew up listening to soul. He grew up in the R&B culture. So even though he's not in the black culture, he grew up in the R&B culture. So is that appropriation when that's actually part of what he grew up listening to and experiencing and, idolizing? I don't think it is, but somebody might say because he's not black, they don't believe he should, or he should give more acknowledgement to the people that he's already acknowledging. I think that's a hard line to draw. Um, Fashion. I think fashion is also one where you have a hard line to draw. Like, if I started dressing like I was from the 70s, am I culturally appropriating the culture of the 70s? Because, I mean, and if I didn't have a real understanding and respect, I just thought bell bottoms and a fro was cool. Is that bad? I'm not sure. Like, I think if I am a, white kid from the suburbs and I dress like I see, you know, the guys on TV, like the rappers on TV, because I think they're cool and I think being hood is being cool. Is that a fashionable, I mean, that culturally appropriating fashion? Or is that just imitating what I believe is cool at the time? Which, I mean, because if that's the case, was white kids getting the Michael Jackson beat it, the jacket with the zippers and stuff, and Thriller and the red jacket and everything, is that cultural appropriation because a black person wore it? So, I mean, these are like, I ask these questions because, like, I think these are the things that we're quick to say this is appropriated, but when we think about it deeper, like those lines run all over the place. How can you really draw it like that? Um, Even with fashion, just geographic locations. How I dress as a black man from North Carolina is different from how I dress being a black man that was raised in New Orleans. That's completely different from being how somebody would dress being raised in New York. But if I started dressing like I was from New York because I saw people in New York and I said, oh, I kind of like how they're wearing that stuff. I kind of like that style. Or if I started dressing like I was in DC, I would remember wearing New Balances here because I saw guys in DC wearing it. And people would be like, oh, that's kind of cool here. Is that cultural appropriation? I don't think it is. Because, I mean, but at the same time, if I just said, well, it's just fashion, what does that matter? Or it's just music, what does that matter? Or it's just style, what does that matter? So, I mean, I think that's where the point I stress when as I go through some of these examples is just that again, some of these lines are so small or so petty or so hard to even comprehend. How can we say it is or it isn't? Or how can we say it's appropriating when when we've also appropriated ourselves? Food is the biggest concept of cultural appropriation I've ever seen. I mean, I can go get Chinese, I can go get Indian, I can go get Mexican, I can go get Jamaican, I can go get Mediterranean. So, you know, being a black person, is it cultural appropriation for me to go eat Chinese food? Do I need to go apologize to a Chinese person for that? Or do I just need to stick to eating soul food every day because I feel as if, boom, that's what we should do? And like I said, originally I'm from New Orleans. So do I just need it? If I make crawfish etouffee or red beans and rice up here and I serve it to people up here, is that me appropriating my culture and serving it to somebody else that's not from that culture? You know, and you might say, is white people using seasoning on their foods cultural appropriation? You might say to me, well, Robert, this is silly. Well, that's my point. Where do we draw those lines? That's, to me, that's just it. Dialects and slang. Again, you don't, because I've been in North Carolina so long, you don't hear how, like, certain words that come out. Because I've been raised in different parts of the South, my dialect is all over the place. If I chose to talk like I was from California, is that culturally appropriating there? Is that cultural appropriation of a West Coast culture? If I chose to talk like I was from Britain, is that cultural appropriation of a British culture? You know, if a white person chose to talk like me because that's what they felt like sounding country was, is that cultural appropriation of that? Or is that cultural appropriation if they felt like, well, that's how a black man would sound? Is that cultural appropriation of being black? What if they, decide to do that and talk like me because I like the way he says it. He says phrases that I like. And that made somebody think, oh, you're trying to sound black, so you're cultural appropriating. What if that wasn't their intent? What if the black part of it was they weren't trying to sound black? They just liked how I talked. Does that even matter? Does focusing on something? My question is always: is focusing on something that's small even matter, or does focusing on what people are taking into their own life even matter anyway? That's just a question that I'm bringing. In terms of that, dance the same. Social media, film, TV, different areas use different social media apps more than others. So if I think that this particular app is dope and I use it because people back from where I'm from use it, and is that, or not, sorry, if I'm somewhere and I say, oh, people here use WhatsApp more or, whatever, and I start using it more, am I cultural appropriating a different culture because I use what they use instead of what would be perceived I should be doing? Or do a particular dance that I learned from somewhere. If I go to India and I see them do a particular dance, a cultural dance, and I like the dance, I like the understanding, the meaning of it, the ritual of it, and I learn it. Does that make me cultural appropriate them? Is it okay for me to do so because I have that understanding and respect, or is it not because of the cultural significance that it has? These are all questions, I mean, that I have to ask as the person imitating as well. I do think it's important to think that just to know that there is some ownership on the people that are imitating as well, to have an understanding of where, in your personal, and I think that line is subjective for everybody, but just where that line kind of draws. And so, the concerns that I have regarding this is, first, how do you decide what is yours to be appropriated, right? I mean, it goes back to what I was saying about like the hair. or even anything. Like everything is taken from somewhere else, and nothing is really truly original. So, how do I decide what is mine when what I believe is mine may come from somebody else? You know, I may, or what I believe is mine, a different culture may believe isn't mine. It may be disputes over who had that. And I think because it's so hard to really, and really pointless a lot of times to really define this is black, this is white, this is southern, this is Christian. Does it really matter in the sense of no, you shouldn't take it, or you should, because of that? Like, I don't really think it matters. But I think it's just very hard to decide what is because of how cultural lines are so intangible and how they shift so easily and how everything is so drawn and weaving together. It is difficult to really get an understanding of what is yours to be appropriated unless you wrote it and signed off and got it trademarked as yours. Then it can be classified as theft. I can't say talking country is if somebody talk like I did or use a lot of slang like I did. Oh, they appropriated the country culture. What is country culture? Like some of this stuff even got to be defined. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so I think it comes into some of it comes into this silliness that I just wanted to highlight because I believe some of the times these arguments are silly where we're arguing over no, you know, white people are getting these dances from black fraternities, and it's like, okay, I mean, who cares? Like, I mean, if they did it and people liked it because they were white, then they were going to like anything that they did because they were white. What did it matter? Like, I just think I think it turns into this massive kind of finger pointing blame game that I think it's very easy to get into and it's easy to get sucked into the conversation because it's oh yeah like it because we get sucked into everything of a kind of a racial conversation now, but I don't like trying to tell other people what they shouldn't do or this is your fault, especially when it's messy like and things that can't be defined like this. And I also think that it's just hard to define where that line begins and ends. And because of that, it goes back to how do you decide what is yours to be appropriated, and it again go back into that massive finger pointing game. Like, I'm gonna go back to the rap music for a minute. If I, as a Hispanic person starts rapping, is that reggaeton? Is that cultural appropriation? If I, as a white person, start rapping, and you say, "Oh, that's fine," but then I try to use autotone to imitate strictly like sounds just like Future or something like that. Is that cultural appropriation? Where is the line in that? Is it just music? If I dress like if I dress like somebody I've seen off of BT or something like that because I thought that was cool, is that fine? But when I wear a specific if the clothing I wear has some sort of specific insignia, logo, or statement, or something specific to a certain like location or a certain um, group, is that me culturally appropriating then because I'm going beyond that general surface level interaction? I don't know, and I think because again that's so hard to define. It's just not something that we should spend time on doing. I mean, I think gatekeeping can be overtly discriminatory and really for no reason, you know, because again, it goes into that, well, you can't do that, then, I mean, if I can't do this, then you can't do that. And that back to that finger pointing thing. Well, if I say, okay, white people, you shouldn't be able to get dreadlocks. Asian people, you shouldn't be able to get dreadlocks. Hispanic people, you shouldn't be able to get dreadlocks. And they say to me, well, okay, well, you shouldn't be able to straighten out your hair. You shouldn't be able to wear long uh, beards. You shouldn't be able to do X, Y, and Z. And then we just get into this back and forth about what one person shouldn't be doing compared to what another person should be doing, like and not really respecting each other for what it is. And I mean, I do think that the uniqueness of our cultures must be respected and preserved. Like in saying this, I know I've talked very much, I've talked highly, I've talked in a positive sense about appropriation because I believe it is an inevitable, I don't want to call it phenomenon, but it's an inevitable force that happens when people meet and exchange ideas. And I don't think it's something that can be stopped. But I do think that cultures can be respected and preserved at the same time. Like, I think a white kid can dress like he seems like somebody he's like his favorite rapper, and still hip hop as a culture can be respected. I think a person can do a prayer that they saw a pastor do on TV, a Christian pastor do, a Christian Baptist pastor do on TV, because and, and not have a full understanding of maybe all the biblical references in a literary sense, but for them, the general intent or the wording of the prayer hit them or touched them in a way that they felt strongly about. And the question is that cultural appropriation? And if it is, isn't that a good thing in that sense? Because somebody took something positive from you and said, I can use this positively in my own life. Is that not a respect towards yours? And I think that's where we have to kind of start looking at. We look at this stuff in any way as being disrespect. And I don't think it's that black and white per se. But I do think where the evil or where the dislike of it comes in is where it's no respect, and it's no respect to that original culture. And in a sense of preservation, and not preservation isn't saying, oh, only they can do this, but to acknowledge these were the originals. This is where this originated from. And when you do this, this is who you're getting it from. And I think that's how you can respect these cultures. And again, it just gets into this slippery slope of demonizing and approving who can do what. And as large of a concept as the ideas and cultures are, that's everything. I mean, we'll get to a point of, oh, you can't read this particular book because it's from a black author, and that's cultural appropriation of black culture. I mean, trying to read from a black author instead of that being something to where it may expand your horizons or your understanding of a different culture. It's no, you're trying to appropriate this culture because you're trying to copy from it. And if I say, or even take it a step further, if I say as a black person, I'm gonna not make it a white person black, but a black person white. If I say as a black person, oh, my favorite artist is this white person, and I took things that I thought were positive from their writing style or from the lessons I learned and tried to put that into my writing, and somebody was like, well, no, you're appropriating white culture, even though I'm technically respecting that culture or respecting the culture of wherever I'm getting it from, and I'm showing that appreciation and that um, intent of positivity and respect. It still turns into this. Well, can you do that? Can you write this? Can you say this? And I feel like we should all be able to be allowed to do whatever we want, quite frankly. And it's up to us to deal with the consequences of how we feel about it because we all have common sense and more, I think, knowledge of how the world works than what we give each other credit for. And so, just to kind of wrap this up, for the world to be open, ideas and styles do have to be copied. Well, I'm not going to say they do have to be, they will be copied. If the world is open, then ideas, styles, um, thoughts, um, all of it that we talked about and more will be copied. They will be imitated. They will be duplicated. That's just how people work. And if the intent of that is not ill, it's not disrespectful, it's not meant to just um, humiliate or not meant or done with no sense of understanding of where it comes from. So from an ignorant standpoint, then I think if none of those factors exist, then I think, whatever we're talking about is okay. It might be what the kids like to say cringeworthy, but I mean, we all are living our own lives and we should be allowed to do so. And I think culture blending, in a sense, in the integration sense I was talking about in the beginning, where we as a planet, we as a global community, the ultimate the ultimate goal, and it's inherent, it's not something that we plan to, but the ultimate goal is integration, which is again all cultures being able to exist within their own and together at the same time peacefully. And that requires both culture blending requires both respect and integration. We both have to respect each other's uniqueness and be able to take from each other and share ideas as well. And that will ultimately be us acting like more like one another, eating foods that come from one another, listening to music that come from one another, sharing ideas that come from one another, talking and meeting with one another, wearing clothes and styles that come from one another. That's just the way that the world works. And when people are sharing ideas. And so I leave you all, and I know I'm not going to say this. I hope I say it 100% correct, but I know I'm not. I leave y'all with this quote, and I think it really kind of sums up a good point of today, where is that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. That mediocrity can pay great. That mediocrity can pay greatness. So I'll say it again. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. That mediocrity can pay greatness. And so it's not just saying that imitation is a serious form of flattery, because it is. To imitate something means that you are flat. I mean that you are flattered by it. I do like this. I'm impressed by this. But also, I think it's important to understand, and I don't say mediocrity, and I know mediocrity in this sense is more of a knock or a disrespectful term, but just that when one takes from the concept of cultural appropriation is one taking something that they feel is valuable and bringing it to their own. And so if you see that somebody is taking something that you feel comes from your culture in a positive light and they're using it for their own, then I would take that as a compliment to yourself and to what you're putting out in the world, because they see it that way as well. So with that, I appreciate y'all. I'm gonna hop off my soapbox now. Appreciate y'all taking the time to listen to me and tuning in to another episode. Maybe I'm just not getting it podcast. I'm your host, Robert Davis. Remember to follow me on social media, Instagram, RTD underscore III, Facebook, Robert Trey Davis III. All episodes out on Spotify now. I appreciate y'all once again. You don't know how much it means for your engagement. Love y'all.